So I made 1,000 video essays about the video game Starfield. To put that in perspective, I'm going to put on screen, because I don't know it off by heart, a list of some of the biggest video essay makers on YouTube, how many subscribers they have, and how many videos they've done. And you'll see that 1,000 is actually quite a lot. It's 1,000 unique, not very good, but 1,000 videos about Starfield, which just feels a really weird thing to say. If you're wondering why anyone would make 1,000 not very good things, and if you're wondering why anyone would watch even one of 1,000 not very good things, that's a great question. They're both great questions, and I'm going to put up an email here that you can direct them to.
And not just this system, but over 100 systems. Over 1,000 planets, all open for you to explore.
The inevitable happened, and it turns out that what 1,000 planets actually amounts to is you will go down to a procedurally generated surface. It has like kind of invisible walls around it. They all kind of look pretty similar. There's different filters on. There'll be like some plants, some animals, and a couple of what they call points of interest. And these will be like a laboratory, a cavern, a mountain, or something like this. And these will just be copy and pasted from each one. But there's not actually that many of these. There's only about, I don't know, about 30. There's a small enough number that if you do this a couple of times, if you go to only a few planets, you start to see the same thing over and over and over and over again. And the things that are between those things are also pretty kind of generic. And the gameplay amounts to landing, trying to find several different copies of plants and animals, and going into, if you want, some of these copy and pasted areas. And copy and pasted to the same point that in like a laboratory, for instance, you'll have the same enemy placement, there'll be the same items there, there'll be the same loot in the chests, which are in the same place. You know, they're literally exactly the same thing. So the questions I brought up earlier about why would you ever do this, and who would be interested in kind of playing, or in the case of videos, watching it, by making 1,000 video essays, I'm kind of trying to get into that. So, how do you make 1,000 video essays in like less than 2 days? The answer is you use procedural generation. And my goals for this kind of project were to do it free and quickly. So, you know, the quality suffers. But here's the process. So I imagined 1,000 videos as being a combination of different modules. So very simply, if you have 3 groups of 10 things, like a part 1, part 2, and part 3, and you mix up each variation of them, 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. The kind of structure for all these videos that I ended up on was part 1, an introduction, which is always the same. Part 2, a kind of topic for the video of 10 different things, which I'll put up. Part 3, which is kind of like the reason. So if part 2 is Starfield might be the best game ever, part 3 would give a reason for that, like, you know, the modding potential or something like this. And kind of as a joke for part 4, the video kind of goes on a bit of a rant about something that's not quite related to the topic. And finally, the conclusion was similar to the first bit. It's going to be the same for all of them. Just kind of, you know, like, subscribe, I'm the best channel ever, give me money, that kind of thing. So it began, as all things do, in ChatGPT. I then moved all of this text into a text-to-speech platform and recorded that. I needed to tweak it a little bit because these platforms are still kind of getting there. The easiest thing to do then would have been to take those audio files and put it into a software like DID, which you might know from the Balenciaga memes, which will just be able to take a picture in an audio file and animate a face speaking along to it. Unfortunately, you have to pay for that, and the free version is so heavily watermarked that the only way around it was to kind of mess up the image so badly that it was kind of, I mean, I quite like it, but it's quite distracting for this kind of thing. Instead of doing that, I kind of ended up going on a less procedural but still at least medium effort process of motion capture with Stable Diffusion. I followed a tutorial that I'll link down below, and that spits out like a very, very low resolution image. You'll see it's not even perfect when it starts, mostly because I'm a terrible actor and I was moving my head too much. So it's mostly my fault. Because this was so low resolution, I tried to stick it on to the original image using the tracking tool within After Effects. This isn't the best way to track a face. If I was doing this again, I'd use Mocha, which is a slightly different process and probably would have worked a lot better. The kind of my head moving plus the character's head moving was somewhat insurmountable, so the quality definitely suffered here. But you know, the excuse is always that the jankiness is quite charming, so I left it at that. This was too much effort to do for all 30 videos, so I just did it for the intro and outro, and for the 3 middle parts, which switch around between these 30 different things, I just covered up with somewhat relevant gameplay and trailers, because you know, this is something that people do for YouTube video game essays anyway, and you know, I wouldn't want to do this if I was just making one video, but if I'm making 1,000, like, you know, you've got to cut corners somewhere. I then exported these modules into 5 folders, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and used a Python module called MoviePy to assemble them in their 1,000 different variations. This took a little bit of effort because I'm not a coder. I was using ChatGPT, but eventually got it to work, and it only took about 20 hours to export, which for 1,000 videos is not so bad, but it's mostly going from, you know, it's mostly going from the same codec to the same codec, so it shouldn't be too much effort for it. So then I had a folder full of 1,000 videos and I had to get them onto YouTube. The original plan was to use even more code, and again, I'm not a coder, so working out authentication tokens and YouTube API access and all this kind of thing was quite painful. And the code worked, it's just that YouTube didn't like me spamming 1,000 videos at a time. It turns out that the limit is 15 at a time and 90 a day. So I dropped the coding idea and did it manually. First I changed the titles within the folder itself in order to kind of not have to change 1,000 video titles manually. But on YouTube you can put like auto descriptions and auto tags and stuff like that, so I used those. For the titles I just used ChatGPT again, getting it to spit out 100 different kind of YouTube-y titles based on the first prompt in part 2. And it was like, you know, it was relatively good at this. About 50% of them were somewhat relevant, which is not a bad hit rate when you're dealing with 1,000 videos. So some of them will get kind of organic traffic, which I find quite entertaining. Changing the titles was a pretty simple script. At this point, I was actually learning enough code to kind of half do it myself and, you know, criticize the modules ChatGPT was choosing. So this has been quite educational. Despite that, I messed up and managed to corrupt every single file, and it took a while to realize why that happened, but because I didn't back up the files, I had to export them all again, and in that 20 hours I had more than enough time to work out the problem. These were then dragged and dropped onto YouTube 15 at a time, 6 times a day, and I wasn't very optimized about this, sometimes I forget, so that took about 2 weeks. The big problem then is thumbnails, and at the time of recording I haven't worked out how to do that yet, and in this video I'll make it clear whether I managed to do that or not, and if not, why. But if you know how to do this, please let me know. We'll try and keep it just to simple reasons without explaining those reasons too much. 1. To reflect on there being 1,000 boring things in a game, and why on earth would anyone want to play that? 2, to reflect on video essays in general and about how actually they kind of mirror the worst elements of this. They might not be procedurally generated, but they're just ripping off ideas from one place, putting it in the other. It's like not much care goes into it, not much thought goes into it. They kind of slap together some kind of B-roll and trailers and some of their own gameplay and maybe like one news thing, and then that that's a day, that's a video for the week. And those people will be complaining about there being too many kind of bad things, too many repeated, low effort, bad things in a video game. I think it's totally valid to complain about that as a normal person, but if you're doing that in the kind of context of a low effort, kind of crappy YouTube channel that's making money, that's something else. 3, I also want to expand that to the whole discourse around Starfield. I was spending a little bit of time in the Starfield subreddit, especially when, coming up with, the various topics for the video and trying to understand more about what other people are saying about the game. And you kind of see the same like 10 arguments copied and pasted over and over and over and over again. And there's lots more things you can say about the game, but you still see these 10 things copy and pasted. And that really started to feel very quickly like the copy and pasted environments in this game, The way it is now, of the 1,000 video essays, they're all positive. And I did that because I wanted to kind of challenge people who defend the game to kind of defend this, but it could have also been interesting to make them more negative and kind of challenge the people who complain about copy and pasted elements to not copy and paste their own argument. I think that's also kind of interesting. In general, I kind of wanted to tie all this together into kind of criticism about overproduction of content, whether that be games or media in general, or even like comments, which is themselves a kind of media. It's not really a discussion. Everyone's producing their own like micro content on something like Twitter or Reddit or something like that. And it's a challenge to start seeing that as like just overwhelmingly shit. like Starfield is like a really special case because it's so egregious. Like, to sell the game on something that is so bland, And having made 1,000 bad things, I can kind of feel like I'm allowed to say more of like, why would you do that? But that kind of just connects to a whole ocean of sludgy, muddy, kind of rubbish content that we have to, well, we don't have to, but we find ourselves wading through all the time. 1,000 1,000 Reddit reposts meets 1,000 planets, So I appreciate the irony in this. I've kind of gone on a very unstructured rant, which could be construed as a video essay, but at the same time, this is connected to a big project, so it's more like a panel discussion of one, I guess. But I also didn't want to over-plan this because the other thing that annoys me about the way that people present arguments in general, not necessarily just on YouTube, is that they're like an authority. So this is really important for me to put myself on camera, even though obviously, like, look at my body language. Like, I don't like being on camera. I'm quite private. But when you see someone in this way, you're more likely to critique them, I think. So that's kind of what I'm trying to encourage. And I also didn't want to like have already mapped out, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to conclude it. Like this project is somewhat open-ended. I was coming up with like new things to think about while doing it, and next week I'll probably think something different about it. Maybe I think it's a complete waste of time, or maybe like I'll get all anti-accelerationist and think I've made things worse by contributing to this like sludge of kind of bad content. But in any case, I hope it's interesting to people. It took much longer than I hoped it would. Not the making of the videos, doing that in just over a day was perfect, but having to like, it's hard to stay interested in something when you've got to drag and drop 15 things at a time, like close to 100 times, all manually. and then not even know if the thumbnails are going to work afterwards, and maybe they don't. You'll know. I'll have put it on screen by this point. So if you have any ideas of your own of what this means, what is the significance, finish my video for me. What is the significance of making 1,000 YouTube video essays about Starfield? Discuss. Bye.